You built this house for a family. That family's gone now. You're just rattling around in here alone. My son, at my kitchen table. I didn't argue. I stood up, thanked them both, and walked them to the door. The trust had already been filed 37 days before he said that. The letter was written too. $214,000. Itemized. 22 years. I placed both on the table when they came back. She read the first page of the trust, then the second. She didn't finish the third. If you enjoy stories about quiet strength and what it really means to protect what you've built, subscribe to Revenge Power right now. The link is in the description. Hey everyone, welcome to Revenge Power. If you love real stories about dignity, sacrifice, and the moment a man finally lets his actions do the talking, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Stay until the very end. Because what was in that second document is what changed everything. My name is Frank Dalton. I'm 64 years old. I've been a contractor. My entire working life started at 18, swinging a hammer for a framing crew out of Miamisburg, moved up through carpentry, then general contracting. Ran my own crew for the last 22 of my 36 years in the trade. When I retired 3 years ago, the sign on my truck said Dalton Construction. The reputation said, shows up, does it right the first time, doesn't complain about it. I don't say any of that to brag. I say it so you understand what it means when I tell you about this house. I built it myself, not hired out, not project managed from a distance. I drew the plans on graph paper at the kitchen table of our rental on Hoover Avenue. I pulled the permits at the Montgomery County Building Department, and I swung a framing hammer in this backyard every Saturday and Sunday for 2.5 years. From the spring of 1989 until the fall of 1991. Barbara used to bring coffee out to the yard in the afternoons. She'd sit on an overturned 5-gallon bucket and read while I worked. And every so often she'd look up and say something like, "You're going crooked on that ridge board," and I'd say, "I know it," and she'd go back to her book. We moved in on a Saturday in November. The driveway was mud. The back deck wasn't finished. 3 of the kitchen cabinet doors were missing because I hadn't gotten to them yet. Barbara walked through every room, touching the window frames and the door casing, Colaris. And when she got back to the kitchen, she turned around and said, "Frank, it's beautiful." I didn't say anything because I had a piece of sawdust in my eye, and I wasn't going to stand in her kitchen and cry on the first day we owned it. The house is 3 bedrooms, brick exterior, on Pine Ridge Road, just east of Dayton. The back lot runs down to a creek. I put a fire pit back there in 1998, and Kyle and Carla spent half their childhoods roasting marshmallows and arguing about which of them was taller. The garage has a 2-car bay. The kitchen has the original tile I put in, white with a blue accent strip. Barbara said she wanted it to look like a lighthouse kitchen, and I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I put in the tile and she was happy, so I was happy. I put Kyle through 4 years at Ohio State. He was the first in our family to finish a college degree, and I want to be clear that I am proud of that, and I don't regret a dollar of it. I kept a running tally in a notebook, not to hold over him, but because that's how I was raised, you write down what things cost so you understand their real weight. By the time Kyle graduated and moved to Columbus, I had put $84,000 into his education alone. Over the years, the total grew. His first car, a down payment loan he never fully paid back, emergency calls when the money ran short. The notebook says $214,000 over 22 years. I never showed him the notebook. Barbara died 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. From the day of the diagnosis to the day of the funeral was 8 weeks. There is nothing I can tell you about those 8 weeks that would make them make sense, so I won't try. What I will tell you is that every morning since then, I get up at 5:30, go to the kitchen, and make coffee. I have a collection of coffee mugs on the shelf above the machine. Some I bought, some were gifts. One is from the Grand Canyon that the kids brought back in 1994. But every morning I reach past all of them, and I use the one with the chipped handle on the left side. It was Barbara's. She bought it at a church sale in 2007 for $1.50. She refused to throw it out when the chip happened because she said it still held coffee just fine, and she wasn't going to waste a perfectly good mug over a cosmetic issue. I still use it every morning. Memory object first appearance. I'm not a lonely man. I want to make that clear. I have my daughter Carla, who lives in Indianapolis with her husband and their 2 kids, Emma and Noah, 8 and 6 years old. Carla calls every Sunday without fail. I have my crew, some of whom still bring work questions to me even though I've been off the job site for 3 years. I have a garden that takes up more of my time than I expected. I go to VFW meetings on the second Tuesday of the month. What I am is quiet. The house is quiet. I know how quiet it is because I built every wall in it, and I know exactly how sound moves through them. In the morning, before the neighborhood wakes up, you can hear the creak from the kitchen window if you leave it open. I like that. I have always liked that. That's the life Kyle and Tanya came to fix. The visit started about a year after Barbara died. That's when Kyle and Tanya started coming down from Columbus more regularly once a month, then more often. In the beginning, I was glad for it. I told myself they were being thoughtful, that they were concerned, that this was what family was supposed to look like. Tanya was pleasant enough in those early months. She cooked sometimes when they visited. She asked questions about the house, where I'd bought this or how I'd done that. I took it as interest. I was proud of the house, and I was glad someone wanted to hear about it. It was sometime around the 8-month mark that I started noticing something different in the questions. She asked about the HVAC system when it was last serviced, what the original install year was. I told her. She asked about the roof. I told her it was a 30-year architectural shingle I'd put on in 2006, so still had some life in it. She nodded and typed something into her phone. I didn't ask what she was typing. Then one afternoon in late spring, she left a folded sheet of paper on the kitchen counter. I assumed it was a grocery list or something she'd been working on. After they left, I unfolded it. It was a Zillow printout. This address, $347,000, estimated. She had highlighted the number in yellow. I set it on the refrigerator under a magnet from a hardware trade show I went to in 2015, and I thought about it for 3 days before I threw it away. Kyle mentioned assisted living for the first time that summer. We were at the Cracker Barrel on North Springboro Pike, which is where we used to go after church when he was a kid, and he said something about how there were some really nice places now, not like the old nursing homes. Dad, these are like communities, and he said one of his coworkers' fathers had moved into one outside Columbus and was really happy there. I said that's good for him. I ate my scrambled eggs. Kyle looked at Tanya. She looked at her coffee. Nothing else was said. But it didn't stop there. Over the next few months, the word alone started appearing in his sentences more often than it used to. Dad, are you sure you're okay here alone? It's a lot of house to maintain. Just you alone. The yard is a lot. By yourself. Each time, I told him I was managing fine. Each time, he nodded in a way that said he didn't quite believe me, but was going to let it go for now. The thing about working in construction for 36 years is that you learn to read a job site before the first nail goes in. You learn what a project looks like when it's being priced, when the bids are being walked, when somebody has already made a decision and they're just going through the motions of the conversation. I'd done it hundreds of times. I knew the look. I started paying attention differently. I noticed that when Tanya walked through the house, she moved through it the way a buyer moves through it, not a guest. She'd stop in the hallway and look at the width. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the cabinet layout with a particular expression, like she was calculating what it would take to remodel it. She opened the door to the garage and looked in without going inside. I was in there when she did it. She didn't see me. The light flickered on. It's been doing that for about 6 months. Something wrong with the switch or the ballast. I've been meaning to fix it. Barbara used to laugh at it. She called it the disco light. Every time you flicked it on, there was that one beat flutter before it settled. Tanya looked at the flickering light, made a small face, and pulled the door shut. I stood in the garage in the dark for a minute. Then I called Tom Bradshaw. Tom has been my attorney since 1998. He handled the closing on this property. He reviewed contracts when I was running the business, and when Barbara was sick, he helped us get our affairs in order. He drives a 12-year-old Buick LeSabre that he is inexplicably loyal to, and his office is in a converted Victorian on Main Street in Miamisburg, sandwiched between a nail salon and an insurance agency. He has a bowl of peppermints on his reception desk and a framed photo of his beagle on the filing cabinet behind his chair. I called him and said, "Tom, I think I need to understand my options." He said, "Come on in." I figured we'd be having this conversation eventually. I drove down there the next week. That was in August. I didn't do anything yet. I just listened, took notes, drove home and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the backyard and thought about it. In September, Kyle and Tanya came down for the Montgomery County Fair, which we'd done every year when the kids were young. We walked through, ate terrible food, looked at the livestock exhibitions and the 4-H displays. It was a good afternoon. Tanya was relaxed in a way she sometimes was when she wasn't trying to accomplish anything, and for a few hours I let myself believe I might be reading the situation wrong. Then on the drive back to the house, Kyle said from the passenger seat, Dad, Tanya and I have been talking, and we want to sit down with you soon about some things. Nothing urgent. Just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. I said, all right. I drove the rest of the way home thinking, the plans are already drawn. They've just been waiting to deliver them. They came on a Saturday morning in October. The leaves on the maple at the corner of my property were at peak orange and yellow, the kind of day a real estate photographer would call perfect. I had coffee going and had already been up for 2 hours by the time they knocked. Kyle had the manila folder. Tanya had her phone and what I can only describe as a prepared expression, warm, careful, and just slightly off from genuine, the way paint looks when it's trying to match something it doesn't quite match. They sat down at the kitchen table, the same table I've had in this kitchen since 1992. It's a solid oak pedestal table, seat 6. Barbara and I bought it at an estate sale in Centerville the year after we moved in, paid $200 for it, and I refinished it in the garage over a weekend. I've had more important conversations at that table than any other piece of furniture I own. Kyle set the folder on the table but didn't open it right away. He asked how I was doing, how the garden was, whether I'd heard from Carla lately. I answered everything. I was not going to be the one to hurry this along. He was going to have to do the work of getting to the point. Eventually, he opened the folder. There were 2 documents. The first was a financial power of attorney form, typed up clean, which would give Kyle authority over my financial decisions in the event that I was unable to manage my own affairs. The second was what they called a caregiver agreement, a document that would formalize Kyle's role as my primary decision maker for healthcare and housing, and which included a clause, written small at the bottom of page 3, that addressed the disposition of real property. That clause said that in the event the primary decision maker determined it was no longer in the best interest of the principal to maintain real property, the decision maker would have authority to proceed with sale or transfer. I read both documents completely. I read them the way I read contracts on the job site, slowly, once straight through, then back again over anything that gave me pause. Tanya poured herself more coffee from the pot I'd made. Kyle watched me read with his hands folded on the table. When I finished, I set the papers down and took a sip from my mug. Kyle said, Dad, we just want to make sure you're protected. That if something happens, there's a plan. I said, I understand. Tanya said, it's what a lot of families in your situation are doing. It just makes things clearer. I looked at her. My situation, I said. She nodded. Living alone, in a property this size, with medical decisions that might need to be made quickly someday. Kyle picked up where she left off. He'd clearly practiced this. His voice was measured, not unkind, but careful in the way that people are careful when they've prepared what they want to say and they don't want to go off script. He talked about responsibility, about peace of mind, about how it would be easier for everyone if the framework was in place. And then he said it. Dad, you built this house for a family. That family's gone now. He paused, looked at the table. You're just rattling around in here alone. You deserve something easier than this. I have thought about that sentence many times since then, not because it hurt me, although it did, in the particular way that a thing can hurt you when someone says out loud what they've been thinking quietly for months. I've thought about it because of how wrong it was. Not wrong the way a calculation is wrong the way a person is wrong when they've decided what something is worth before they've understood what it is. This house is not a vacancy. It is not a structure rattling around an old man. It is the place where Barbara told me she was pregnant with Kyle, standing in the kitchen doorway, with her hand over her mouth and her eyes bright. It is the place where Carla came home from her first day of kindergarten crying because a boy said her lunchbox was babyish, and I told her any boy who cared about lunchboxes wasn't worth her time. It is the place where I carried Barbara's hospital bag through the front door 4 years ago, after the diagnosis, and set it down on the floor and stood there for a moment before I could bring myself to put it away. None of those things are rattling around anywhere. They're right here. I set my coffee down. I'll think about it, I said. Kyle said, Dad? I said, I'll think about it, Kyle. He looked at Tanya. She looked at him. Some agreement passed between them close enough. For now, they'd circle back. They left after another half hour of smaller conversation. Kyle hugged me at the door. The hug was the same as always, brief, solid. I didn't hold it against him. I didn't know yet how much I should. After the car backed out of the driveway and disappeared around the corner of Pine Ridge Road, I stood at the kitchen window for a moment. Then I went to the cabinet, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat back down at the table. I reached for Barbara's mug, the one with the chipped handle, memory object second appearance. I held it with both hands. I sat there for a long time. I thought about the number in my notebook, $214,000. I thought about the $84,000 at Ohio State, the $12,000 car, the $40,000 loan that came back in pieces and then stopped coming back at all. I thought about the Sundays we drove down to Columbus to help Kyle and his then girlfriend move apartments because they didn't want to spend money on movers. I thought about the phone calls at 2 in the morning when things were bad. I wasn't angry. That's the honest answer. I was something closer to clear, like a window after rain. I stood up, went to the garage. The light flickered on 1 beat, 2 beats, settled. Barbara's disco light. I got in my truck and drove to Miamisburg. Tom Bradshaw was at his desk when his receptionist brought me back. He had a legal pad in front of him and a cup of coffee that had been sitting long enough to be cold. He looked up when I came in and said, "I'm guessing this got more specific." "They brought papers," I said. He nodded slowly. Picked up his pen. "Tell me what they had." I told him. He wrote. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, the old leather one that he's had since before I first came to this office, and he looked at the ceiling for a moment the way he does when he's arranging his thoughts. "The caregiver agreement clause on the real property," he said. "That's the one you need to understand." "I understood it fine," I said. "That's why I'm here." He smiled. "Not big, just enough." "All right, let me tell you what you can do. An irrevocable trust is exactly what it sounds like. Once it's created and recorded, it cannot be undone. Not by Kyle, not by Tanya, not by any financial power of attorney they might convince me to sign in the future, because the house would no longer be in my name to be transferred. It would be in the trust. I would remain the trustee for the rest of my natural life, which meant I would continue to live here, maintain the property, make decisions about it. But the ultimate beneficiaries, the people who would receive the property when I was gone, would be Emma and Noah, Frank Jr.'s grandchildren, Kyle's children. I want to note that I spent a good deal of time thinking about whether this was the right thing for the grandkids. Emma is 8, Noah is 6. They come down from Indianapolis with Carla 3 or 4 times a year, and they know this house the way kids know a place that feels safe to them. They know where the extra blankets are. They know that the pantry has animal crackers. Noah once fell asleep on the back porch wrapped in a Bengals blanket watching the fireflies, and I sat in my chair watching him sleep for 20 minutes because I wasn't willing to move him. The house means something to them, even at their age. They had nothing to do with what Kyle and Tanya were trying to accomplish. I wasn't punishing them. I was protecting them. Tom drafted the trust. I signed it. He filed it with the Montgomery County Recorder's Office, and we had it recorded the following week. As of that Friday, the house on Pine Ridge Road was no longer mine in the ordinary sense of the word. It was in trust. I was the trustee. Emma and Noah were the beneficiaries. Then I went home and I opened the notebook. I've kept this notebook for 22 years. It's a standard composition notebook, the kind you buy at Walgreens for $1.49, and I started it the September Kyle enrolled at Ohio State because I wanted to know what the real cost was going to be, not as a ledger of grievances, just as a record. The way I keep records on every job, materials, labor, days elapsed. You keep the numbers because the numbers tell the truth when memory gets generous. Over 22 years, the total came to $214,000 and change. I itemized it onto a single sheet of paper. Clean, typed on the computer in the den. Ohio State, 4 years, $84,000. First vehicle, $12,000. Down payment assistance loan, $40,000. This one I listed with a note, original terms. Repayment over 5 years, last payment received 2019, balance of $18,400 remaining. Emergency requests, documented, 31,000. Miscellaneous support over 22 years, 47,000. I put the paper in an envelope, sealed it, wrote nothing on the outside. I called Carla that night. Carla is 4 years younger than Kyle. She went to Indiana University, paid for largely by loans and her own work, with some help from us, much less than Kyle had. She is a physical therapist now, married to a man named Dave who works for the State Highway Department, and their children are the light of my remaining years. She calls every Sunday. When I told her about Kyle's visit, about the folder, about the power of attorney, about the caregiver agreement, the line went quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Dad." "I know," I said. "How long has this been going on?" I told her about the Zillow printout, about Tanya measuring the hallway, about the assisted living conversation at the Cracker Barrel. Carla listened without interrupting, which is something she learned to do from Barbara and which I have always appreciated. When I finished, she said, "Do you want me to come down?" "Not yet," I said. I've already done what needs doing. Then what are you going to do? Wait, I said. They'll come back. They always come back when they think there's a deal that hasn't been finalized. She didn't like it, but she trusted me. I told her I'd explain more when I saw her. Her birthday was coming up in a few weeks. She was planning to come down with the kids. I said, good. Have Kyle and Tanya come too. Another silence. Dad, are you sure? I'm sure, I said. I went out to the garage that night after I hung up. Turned the light on. 1 beat, 2 beats, steady. I stood in the middle of the garage, my table saw, my planer, the workbench I built in 1994, the pegboard with the outlines of each tool traced in pencil, so I always know what's missing, and I stood there for a while just being in the room. This is what I built. All of it. Every board, every joint, every hour. Nobody was going to walk me out of it. Carla's birthday is the 5th of November. She came down the evening before with Dave and the kids, and I had the guest rooms made up and a pot of chili going on the stove when they pulled into the driveway. Emma ran up the porch steps and hugged me around the middle the way 8-year-olds do, full commitment, no reservations. Noah stood at the bottom of the steps and said, Grandpa, is there cornbread? And I said there was, and he came up the steps at approximately normal speed. That evening, the 4 of us, Carla, Dave, and the kids, sat around the kitchen table and ate chili and cornbread and talked about nothing important in the best possible way. Noah told me at length about a science project he'd done on earthworms. Emma showed me 3 chapters of a book she was writing about a horse who solves mysteries. Carla and Dave talked about a road trip they were planning for the summer. I sat at the head of the table and listened and looked around the room, the lighthouse kitchen, the tile Barbara picked, the window over the sink with the blue curtains she sewed herself in 2003, and I thought, this is what a family looks like. Not the version on paper, not the version in a folder. This. Kyle and Tanya arrived the next morning at 11. I watched them pull in from the kitchen window. Kyle drove a gray Audi now he'd traded up about 2 years ago. Tanya had the same folder I'd seen in October, or a new one that looked the same. She tucked it under her arm when she got out of the car. Kyle walked with his hands in his pockets. He came in and hugged Carla, shook Dave's hand, crouched down to say hello to Emma and Noah, who were politely interested and then went back to what they were doing. He came to me last and hugged me the same way as always, brief, solid. I handed him a cup of coffee. The morning went quietly. There was birthday cake for Carla chocolate, her request, and I made the frosting from scratch because it is one of the 2 things I can bake from memory. We sat on the back porch for a while in the weak November sun. Dave and Kyle talked about football. Carla and Tanya talked about something I couldn't hear from where I sat. Emma and Noah found the fire pit and started arranging sticks around it with the purposefulness of engineers who had decided not to explain their project. I sat in my chair and watched my family and held my coffee and waited. The folder stayed under Tanya's arm all morning. After lunch, the kids went to the living room to watch a movie. Dave went to make a phone call. Carla sat at the kitchen table with a second slice of birthday cake she didn't need and was going to eat anyway because it was her birthday and that was her right. Kyle and Tanya sat across from her. I was standing at the kitchen counter, facing the backyard window. I could see everyone's reflection in the glass. Kyle cleared his throat. He looked at me first, then at Carla. So, since we're all here, he said, I wanted to take a few minutes and go over something with Dad. Carla looked at him, then at me. I turned around slowly and leaned against the counter with my arms folded. Kyle opened the folder. The documents were revised from October cleaner, organized differently, a small sticky note on one page that said, Times sign here, Times in Tanya's handwriting. We talked to a lawyer, Kyle said, and this is the cleanest way to structure things so that Dad is protected and there's a clear plan for the property. Carla said, What property? Kyle looked at her. The house. I know what property. Her voice was very level. Why are we talking about this at my birthday dinner? Tanya said, Carla, we're just worried about your dad. We all are. She looked at me. Dad, we're all so worried about you. You're alone here. This house is a lot, and we just want to make sure there's a plan. I appreciate that, I said. We're not trying to take anything away, Kyle said. He was looking at the table now. We just want to be sure that if something happens, there's structure, that decisions can be made quickly, that nobody is stuck. He slid the folder toward me. Just sign here, Dad. It's simple. I looked at the folder. I looked at Kyle. I looked at Carla, whose expression had gone from confused to something else, a kind of watchful stillness I recognized, because it's the same one I wear when I'm about to understand something I didn't want to. I reached into my inside jacket pocket. I had put on a jacket for Carla's birthday. I do that for birthdays. Barbara always said a jacket meant you were taking something seriously, and I have continued to believe that. I placed 2 items on the kitchen table. The first was a set of folded papers, the trust documents, a copy of the recording from the Montgomery County Recorder's Office, dated 6 weeks prior. The house on Pine Ridge Road, placed in irrevocable trust. Frank Dalton as trustee, beneficiaries, Emma Rose Hadley and Noah James Hadley. The second was the envelope. I didn't say anything about what was in it. I just placed it next to the trust documents. Sealed. No writing on the outside. Kyle looked at the papers without touching them. Tanya leaned forward and picked up the trust document. She read the first page, then the second. Her expression went through several changes in a short period of time. I have been on enough job sites when a contractor realizes he bid a job wrong to recognize what a person looks like when the numbers don't add up the way they expected. Kyle picked up the envelope, looked at it, looked at me. I said, "Open it." He opened it. He took out the single sheet of paper. I watched him read it. I watched his eyes go down the list: Ohio State, vehicle, loan, emergency requests, miscellaneous. I watched him read the total at the bottom. He set the paper down. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of the movie the kids were watching in the other room. I said, "I'm already done, Kyle." Not angry, not loud, just that. Kyle said, "Dad." I said, "I know, son." Neither of us said anything else for a moment. Tanya put the trust document back on the table. She looked at me with an expression I won't try to interpret. There are looks in a situation like that one that aren't mine to explain. She said, "This doesn't have to be a conflict." I looked at her. I didn't say anything. The looking was enough. She looked away first. After that, the air went out of the room in a particular way, the kind of way you can feel but can't describe. Kyle folded the sheet of paper and put it back in the envelope and set it on the table. He didn't give it back to me and he didn't keep it. He just left it there, which said something, though I couldn't have told you exactly what. Tanya said they should probably get on the road. Kyle stood up. He looked at me once more, a long look, the kind that carries more weight than the words around it, and then he said, "I need to think." "Take your time," I said. He nodded. He hugged Carla. He said something to her in a low voice I didn't try to hear. He shook Dave's hand. He went to the living room and said goodbye to the kids. He did all of this the way you do things when you're moving on autopilot, because the main part of you is still back at the kitchen table trying to figure out what just happened. Tanya said nothing to me on the way out. They drove away. The Audi backed out, turned onto Pine Ridge Road, and disappeared the same way all cars disappear from this driveway around the corner into the ordinary afternoon. Carla stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me. Then she looked at the papers on the table, then back at me. "You knew they were going to do this today," she said. "I thought they might," I said. She sat down at the table, not in her usual chair. In Kyle's chair, she sat there and looked at the trust documents and the envelope for a while. "Are you all right?" she said. I thought about it honestly. "Yeah," I said. "I got 2 mugs of decaf." We took them out to the back porch and sat in the chairs I've had out there since 2003. The backyard was fading into early November dusk. The fire pit cold. The kids' stick project still arranged exactly where they'd left it. The creek was running low and quiet somewhere at the bottom of the lot. We sat there until the sun finished going down. We didn't talk about it much. Carla put her feet up on the porch railing the same way she's done since she was a teenager, and I looked at the yard I've been looking at for 33 years. At some point, Emma came to the screen door and said, "Grandpa, Noah wants to know if we can have more cornbread." I said they could. In the weeks after that Saturday, Kyle called twice. Once about 10 days later, a short conversation, the weather, a question about Thanksgiving plans that neither of us really answered. Once a few days after that, even shorter, he called. I picked up. We talked about nothing for 5 minutes, and then he said he had to go. I said, "All right." I didn't call him back. I want to be honest about that. Some people will read this and think I should have reached out more. Maybe they're right. I thought about it. I thought about calling and saying something that might open a door. But every time I sat with that thought for a while, I came back to the same place. I had tried to open doors before. I had tried quietly, over the course of months, to let Kyle know without saying it directly that something was wrong, that the way Tanya was moving through this house concerned me, that the plan they were making didn't account for the person they were making it about. I had tried and it hadn't worked. I am not sure that me picking up the phone in November would have done anything different than me setting 2 documents on the kitchen table did. I am genuinely not certain. That's the part of this I hold on to when I wonder if I handled it right. There is a story that I tell myself sometimes, where I handled all of this better, where I found a way to talk to Kyle before Tanya got involved, or where I said something that first summer when I saw the Zillow printout on the counter, or where I drove up to Columbus and had a conversation that I never ended up having. I don't know if that story is true. I don't know if it was ever available to me. I'm not sure the version of Kyle who walked into my kitchen with that folder was the same Kyle who would have listened to a different version of this conversation. What I know is this: I built this house. I paid for it in time and labor and 36 years of work, and I have not once in 33 years asked anyone's permission to live in it. I raised 2 children in it. I buried my wife and then got up the next morning and came down to the kitchen and made coffee in it. It is not a problem to be solved. It is not an asset to be managed. It is a house. And as long as I am drawing breath and paying my taxes and maintaining the foundation I poured myself in 1989, it belongs to me, and then it belongs to my grandchildren. That is not selfishness. I have thought a great deal about whether it is. I do not believe it is. What I also believe, and this is the harder thing to say out loud, is that Kyle was not entirely wrong about everything. I am getting older. The house does require more maintenance than it used to. There will come a day, I don't know when decisions will need to be made and I won't be the one making them. That day is real. Planning for it is reasonable. What was not reasonable was the way the planning was happening. What was not reasonable was Tanya measuring my hallway without asking. What was not reasonable was the clause on page 3 about the disposition of real property. A caregiver agreement is a document about a person's welfare. That document was a document about a property's transfer. Those are not the same thing, and I know the difference because I can read. I don't need them to agree with me, but I needed them to know that I knew. 6 months after Carla's birthday, on a Sunday morning in May, my phone rang at 20 minutes past 8. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee. "The name on the screen," said Kyle. I answered. He said, "Hey, Dad." His voice was different from the November calls. Something had been wrung out of it, the careful quality was gone. He sounded like a man who had been driving for a while and wasn't entirely sure where he'd ended up. I said, "Hey, I'm at the BP station out on Route 40, he said. "I was just driving around for a bit. I waited." He said, "Tanya left." 3 weeks ago, a pause. "I've been meaning to call." I said, "I figured something had changed." I didn't know what to say. Another pause. "I still don't know what to say." I thought about that, about the things I could say, about all the versions of this conversation I'd had in my head over the past 6 months. All the things I'd worked out and practiced and then put back in the drawer because the time for them hadn't come. I said, "Come on then." He drove over. It took about 15 minutes from the Route 40 BP. I heard his car pull into the driveway, the Audi, same as always, and I went to the coffee maker. I poured 1 mug for me. Then I reached past the collection on the shelf and took down the other one, the one with the chipped handle. I filled it up and set it on the table. Memory object, third appearance. Kyle came in through the front door, which I'd left open. He looked like he'd slept badly for an extended period. He stood in the kitchen doorway the same way he used to stand in it as a teenager when something had gone wrong, and he hadn't decided yet whether he was going to admit it. He looked at the mug on the table, looked at it for a moment. "Is that Mom's?" he said. "It still holds coffee just fine," I said. He sat down in his chair at the table. He wrapped his hands around the mug the way Barbara used to, both hands, and he looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up at the window over the sink. The blue curtains she sewed in 2003 were still there, a little faded now, and the morning light came through them in a way I have been watching for 23 years. He started crying. Not loud, not dramatically, just quietly, in the way that men who were raised not to cry will sometimes cry when there's nobody watching who they need to perform for. I let him. I sat across from him and drank my coffee and looked out the window at the back lot. The yard was starting to green up from the spring. The fire pit had a couple of leaves in it from winter. The creek would be running well after the rains we'd had. After a while he said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I said, "I know." He looked at me. I don't know how much of it I chose. Does that make sense? I don't know how much was me and how much was Kyle, I said. He stopped. "I know." We sat there for another few minutes without talking. The house was quiet the way it's always quiet on Sunday mornings. Some kind of bird was working in the yard. I should probably know the name of it by now. I've heard it out there every spring for 30 years. Kyle said, "The house I want you to know I never wanted." "I know that too," I said. "The trust stays, but that's not about you and me. That's for Emma and Noah. That's what it was always for." He nodded. He looked at the mug again. He turned it in his hands until the chipped handle was facing him, and he ran his thumb across it the way a person does when they're touching something that connects them to someone they can't get back. She used to drink her coffee so slow, he said. It was always cold by the time she finished it. Every morning, I said. He set the mug down carefully, like something that could break. We stayed at the kitchen table for a long time after that. I made a second pot of coffee. He stayed for lunch. We didn't talk about Tanya or the documents or the trust or any of it in any more detail. We talked about the kids, his and Carla's, and about what I was planning to grow in the garden this year, and about a roof repair I was going to have someone come in and do because my knees aren't what they were at 52. He helped me do the dishes. He left in the afternoon when the sun was getting low. He hugged me at the door, the same brief, solid hug, and I held it a second longer this time. Not much, just enough. He drove away. The Audi around the corner, Pine Ridge Road, the ordinary afternoon. I went back inside. I rinsed the mugs, mine and Barbara's, and put them back on the shelf side by side. I stood at the kitchen window for a minute and looked at the back lot, the fire pit, the creek somewhere below the lot line, the yard I have been maintaining for 33 years. The relationship between Kyle and me is not what it was a year ago. I don't know if it will ever be exactly what it was before Tanya, or before the folder, or before the particular combination of circumstances that led to my son standing in my kitchen in October asking me to sign away the house I built. Some versions of people and relationships don't come back entirely once they've been changed. I have lived long enough to know that, and I am not going to tell you otherwise. But something new is possible. I'm not certain what it looks like yet. I'm not certain it will stay. I am at 64 years old, more comfortable with uncertainty than I used to be. You work on enough buildings to understand that the foundation is the thing. Everything built above it can be repaired, replaced, rebuilt. You just have to know where the foundation is and refuse to give it up. The house is still mine, in trust for Emma and Noah, who will inherit it from me someday and who will make their own decisions about it, and who I trust completely to figure it out. That evening, I went to the garage to get a garden tool I needed. I flipped the switch, 1 beat of darkness, 2 beats, then the light held. I stood in the middle of the garage for a moment, the table saw, the planer, the workbench, the pegboard with every tool in its place, and the light was steady and clear, and I just stood there for a while, in the room I built, in the house I built, on the lot I paid for, with my own name on the deed, and my grandchildren's names on the trust, and nobody else's name on anything. Then I went and got the garden tool. If you're watching this and you have a grown child who has started treating your home like an asset instead of a place where you live, I want to say something directly to you. I am not sure I handled every part of this perfectly. That is the honest answer. There are moments I would do differently if I could. There are conversations I avoided because I didn't want to start an argument. And maybe some of those conversations, if I'd had the courage to have them earlier, might have changed the sequence of events. I'm not certain. I'll never know. But here is what I am certain about. A home is not a transaction. A life's worth of work is not an asset for someone else to manage. Dignity is not a thing that should need to be defended in your own kitchen, but if it does need to be defended there, then you defend it, quietly, if possible, with documents, if necessary, with complete accuracy and no raised voice, if you can manage it. My father used to say that a man who doesn't argue doesn't mean a man who doesn't decide. He meant it about stubborn customers, but I have found it applies to most of life. I have a question for you, and I genuinely like to know what you think. When Kyle slid that folder across the table and asked me to sign, was I too quiet for too long before that moment? Or did I do exactly what needed to be done, when it needed to be done? Drop your verdict in the comments. I read every single one. If this story reminded you of something in your own family, something you've been carrying that maybe you haven't talked about, tell me what happened. You're not alone. And if you know someone who has given everything to build something real and who is having to fight to keep it, send this to them. Let them know that staying quiet is not the same as being weak. That some men do their loudest work on paper, in lawyers' offices, in the records room at the county courthouse. Real power isn't loud, it's documented. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story.